The dining room chandelier cast warm light over the mahogany table where my parents sat across from my wife and me. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast, and Dad was telling one of his construction stories from the old days. Everything looked perfect, the kind of family dinner Norman Rockwell would have painted. That's when Zara decided to drop her little bomb. "You know," she said, cutting her meat with surgical precision, "Drake really depends on me for everything." She looked directly at my mother, then my father, making sure she had their complete attention. "I handle all the finances, all the important decisions. If he doesn't behave himself, I suppose I'll just have to find him a replacement." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that filled the suddenly quiet room. I didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't storm out like she probably expected. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile I'd perfected during 15 years of marriage to a woman who thought manipulation was an art form. I took a sip of wine, noted the time on the grandfather clock in the corner, and filed away the faces of everyone who'd just witnessed her little performance. "More potatoes, honey?" I asked, as if she'd just commented on the weather. "My name is Drake Torrin, and I'm a custom furniture maker. I work with my hands, creating beautiful pieces from raw wood, taking something rough and shaping it into exactly what it needs to be. It's a skill that requires patience, precision, and the ability to see potential where others see problems." That night, as Zara slept beside me in our king-sized bed, I applied those same skills to my marriage. I started in my study, the one room in the house she'd never bothered to learn the password for. My laptop glowed in the darkness as I methodically copied every bank statement, every investment record, every piece of financial documentation we'd accumulated over the years: joint accounts, individual accounts, retirement funds, insurance policies, everything. The printer whispered quietly as it produced copies. I scanned documents with my phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud account she didn't know existed, and organized everything into neat digital folders. By 3 a.m, I had a complete picture of our financial life spread across my desk like blueprints for a house. But I wasn't building anything. I was preparing to tear it all down. The next step required a trip to my workshop in the garage. Between my table saw and drill press, I kept a fireproof safe where I stored important papers. I added tonight's harvest to the collection and locked it away. Then I sat at my workbench, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and wood stain, and made a list. Divorce attorney. Check the reviews. Find someone ruthless. Bank accounts. Separate everything. Protect my assets. House. Understand my rights. Know the law. Evidence. Document everything from now on. I worked until dawn, my hands steady despite the coffee and adrenaline. When Zara's alarm went off at 6:30, I was already showered and dressed, scrambling eggs in the kitchen like any other Wednesday morning. "Sleep well?" I asked, as she stumbled downstairs in her silk robe. "Fine," she mumbled, heading straight for the coffee machine. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what you said at dinner." She paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Then her usual confidence reasserted itself. "Oh, that. I was just joking around with your parents. You know how I am." "I do know how you are," I said, sliding perfectly cooked eggs onto her plate. "That's exactly the problem." She studied me over her coffee, trying to read my expression. But I'd had years of practice hiding my thoughts from her. She saw what I wanted her to see: a husband going through the motions of a normal morning. "I have that client presentation today," she said finally. "Don't wait up if I'm late." "Wouldn't dream of it." After she left for her advertising agency downtown, I made my first call. Margaret Chen. No, that name was forbidden. Margaret Collins, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being thorough and completely without mercy. Her secretary scheduled me for that afternoon. By 9 a.m. I was at First National Bank, where I'd done business for 20 years. The manager, a soft-spoken man named Robert, had helped us with our mortgage and investment accounts. He knew me, trusted me, and more importantly, he understood exactly what I needed to do. "I want to separate all joint accounts," I told him, sliding the paperwork across his desk. "Transfer my portion to new individual accounts and remove my authorization from anything that's primarily hers." Robert reviewed the documents, his expression carefully neutral. "This is quite a significant change, Mr. Torrin. Are you certain about this course of action?" "Absolutely certain. Within 2 hours, I'd restructured our entire financial relationship. Joint checking became 2 separate accounts. The savings account we'd built together was divided according to contribution records I'd carefully maintained. Credit cards were canceled and reissued. Her access to my business accounts was revoked. I left one joint account active, the household expense account we used for groceries and utilities. I deposited exactly enough to cover 1 month of basic expenses, then removed my name from it entirely. Let her figure out how to pay for her lifestyle without my income supporting it. The attorney meeting went better than I'd hoped. Margaret Collins was a sharp woman in her 50s who listened to my story without judgment and asked pointed questions about assets, property, and what I wanted to achieve. "Based on what you've told me," she said, "you have excellent grounds for divorce and a strong position regarding property division. Your wife's public statements about controlling you financially could actually work in your favor, especially with witnesses. How quickly can we move?" "I can have papers drawn up by tomorrow morning. Service can happen by end of week." "Do it." I spent the rest of the afternoon at the county courthouse, researching property records and filing preliminary paperwork. The house was in both our names, but I'd made the down payment from my inheritance and paid the majority of the mortgage from my business income. The law was on my side. By evening, I'd accomplished more in 1 day than most people manage in a month of divorce proceedings. But I wasn't done, not even close. Zara came home at 9:30, carrying takeout from an expensive restaurant downtown. She seemed relaxed, almost cheerful, probably still enjoying the memory of humiliating me in front of my parents. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch with her designer handbag and restaurant bag. "Productive," I said. "Very productive." She didn't ask for details. After 15 years of marriage, she'd trained herself not to show interest in my work or my thoughts. That indifference had hurt me once. Tonight, it was going to save me a lot of explaining. I watched her eat her expensive dinner while scrolling through her phone, probably texting with her friends about what a pathetic husband she'd married. Let her enjoy it. Tomorrow was going to be a very different kind of day. "I'm heading to bed," I announced around 10:30. "I'll be up in a bit," she said without looking up from her phone. But I didn't go to bed. Instead, I returned to my study and began phase 2 of my plan. If Zara thought she could replace me, she was about to learn exactly how much she'd taken for granted. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes everything look washed out and tired. Perfect for what I had planned. Zara left for work at her usual time, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, already deep in conversation with someone about a client campaign. She barely acknowledged me as she grabbed her keys from the kitchen counter. "See you tonight," she called over her shoulder. "Maybe," I replied, but she was already out the door. I waited exactly 30 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back for something she'd forgotten. Then I made my move. First stop, Margaret Collins' office to pick up the divorce papers. She'd worked late to get them ready, and they were everything I'd hoped for. Comprehensive, detailed, and absolutely devastating to Zara's comfortable little world. "Service is scheduled for this afternoon," Margaret informed me. "A process server will deliver them to her office at 3 p.m. during her weekly staff meeting." Perfect timing. "Mr. Torrin, I have to ask, are you prepared for her reaction? In my experience, people like your wife don't respond well to losing control." "I'm counting on it." My next stop was the bank, where I implemented the final phase of the financial separation. Robert had prepared everything according to my instructions. With a few signatures, I completed the transfer of funds and closed the joint accounts that had given Zara access to my money. The secondary credit cards linked to your accounts have been canceled, he explained. She'll discover that when she tries to use them. How long before the cancellation takes effect? Immediately. I checked my watch. Zara would be taking my mother to lunch in about 2 hours, a weekly tradition they'd maintained for the past 5 years. Mom always insisted on paying, but Zara usually made a show of offering to split the check with her platinum card. Today's lunch was going to be memorable for all the wrong reasons. While I waited for the fireworks to begin, I drove to the storage facility, where we kept seasonal decorations and old furniture. Using my key and authorization code, I removed everything that belonged to me: tools, family heirlooms, and several valuable pieces I'd crafted over the years. It took 3 trips with my pickup truck, but by noon, I'd relocated everything to a secure unit across town that only I could access. I was unloading the last box when my phone rang. Mom's number. Drake, could you come to lunch? Something's happened with Zara's credit card, and she seems quite upset. I could hear Zara's voice in the background, sharp with panic and embarrassment. The restaurant was probably packed with the usual lunch crowd, making her humiliation deliciously public. I'll be right there, I said, trying to sound concerned instead of satisfied. Romano's Italian restaurant was exactly as I'd pictured it. Busy, noisy, and full of people who knew my wife by reputation, if not by name. I found Mom and Zara at their usual table by the window, but the atmosphere was nothing like their typical pleasant lunch. Zara's face was flushed, her designer purse open on the table with credit cards scattered around her plate. She looked up when she saw me approaching, her eyes bright with anger and confusion. Drake! Thank goodness! Something's wrong with all my cards. They keep getting declined. That's terrible, I said, sliding into the empty chair beside my mother. What do you think happened? I don't know. The bank must have made some kind of mistake. I tried calling, but they said they couldn't discuss account details over the phone. Mom looked worried. I paid for lunch, of course, but Zara seems to think there might be some kind of fraud or identity theft. Identity theft, I repeated thoughtfully. That's a possibility. Or maybe the bank froze the accounts for some other reason. Zara's phone buzzed. She grabbed it eagerly, probably hoping for good news from the bank. Instead, her face went white as she read whatever message had just arrived. What is it, dear? Mom asked. Zara's hands were shaking as she set down the phone. I need to get back to the office. There's an emergency. But it wasn't an emergency at the office. It was a process server with divorce papers, and based on her expression, she knew exactly what that message meant. I have to go, she said, standing so quickly she nearly knocked over her water glass. Mrs. Torrin, thank you for lunch. Drake, we need to talk tonight. She practically ran out of the restaurant, leaving her scattered credit cards on the table. I gathered them up carefully and tucked them into my wallet. Is everything all right? Mom asked. She seemed so distressed. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, I said. These things usually work themselves out. But even as I said it, I knew Zara's real problems were just beginning. By now, she'd received the divorce papers and discovered that her access to our joint accounts had been terminated. She'd probably tried calling the bank, only to learn that I'd legally separated our finances and removed her authorization from my business accounts. I drove Mom home, listening to her worry about Zara's strange behavior and the credit card problems. She had no idea that her daughter-in-law's comfortable world was collapsing in real time, one declined transaction at a time. You'll take care of her, won't you? Mom asked as I walked her to her door. Marriage has its ups and downs, but you work through them together. Don't worry, Mom. I'll take very good care of Zara. I meant every word, just not in the way she thought. By the time I got home, Zara's car was already in the driveway. I could see her silhouette in the kitchen window, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The divorce papers were probably spread across the counter, along with bank statements and credit card bills she was trying to make sense of. I took my time getting out of the truck, gathering the mail from the box, checking the tire pressure, anything to let the tension build a little more. When I finally walked through the front door, Zara was waiting for me in the hallway, her face a mask of controlled fury. "We need to talk," she said. I figured we might. She led me to the kitchen, where the divorce papers were indeed spread across the granite counter like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, credit card bills, and her laptop were arranged around them in a chaotic pattern that spoke of hours of frantic research. "What the hell is this, Drake?" I glanced at the papers as if seeing them for the first time. Legal documents, it looks like. Divorce papers, specifically. "Don't play games with me. You know exactly what this is. What I want to know is why. You told me last night that you could replace me if I didn't behave. I decided to save you the trouble." She stared at me, probably trying to process the idea that her doormat husband had actually grown a spine. "This is insane. You can't just file for divorce because of something I said at dinner." "Actually, I can. No-fault divorce laws are wonderful things." "And the bank accounts? You stole money from our joint accounts." "I separated my money from our joint accounts. Everything was divided according to contribution records and legal ownership. Your lawyer can review the documentation." "My lawyer?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't need a lawyer because this is ridiculous. We're not getting divorced, Drake. I won't allow it." That's when I realized she still didn't understand. She thought this was some kind of negotiating tactic, a way to get her attention or force her to treat me better. She couldn't conceive of a world where she didn't have complete control over the situation. "Zara," I said gently, "you don't get to allow or disallow anything anymore. I filed for divorce. The papers have been served. The process is in motion." "But why? Because of one stupid comment? I was joking." "No, you weren't. And even if you were, it doesn't matter. I'm done." She tried a different approach, moving closer and softening her voice. "Drake, honey, we can work this out. We've been married 15 years. We have a life together, a home, shared friends. Shared friends who heard you threaten to replace me. Shared home that you've been using as leverage to control me. Shared life that you've been systematically destroying with your need to dominate everything and everyone around you." Her mask slipped completely. "Fine. You want to play hardball? I can play hardball too. I'll take you for everything you have. The house, the business, your precious workshop, all of it." "Good luck with that." I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken that morning, the empty storage unit where she'd hidden some of our more valuable items. "Your friend Carla's apartment is probably feeling a little crowded right about now, with all those boxes you moved there last week. Unfortunately, most of what you took belongs to me individually, not to us jointly. I'll be picking it up tomorrow." The color drained from her face. "How did you know about Carla's place?" "I've known for months, Zara. I've known about a lot of things." I let that sink in for a moment, watching her mental calculations shift as she realized how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered her. "This isn't over," she said finally. "You're right. It's just getting started." I woke up Friday morning to an empty house. Zara's car was gone. Her side of the closet looked ransacked, and there was a note on the kitchen counter, written in her sharp, angry handwriting. "Gone to think. Don't try to contact me." Perfect. That gave me the entire day to implement phase 3 of my plan. My first call was to a locksmith. "I need the locks changed on my house today. All of them. Front door, back door, garage, everything." "That's a big job, Mr. Torrin. Might take most of the day." "I'll pay extra for priority service." While I waited for the locksmith, I contacted a security company about installing cameras around the property. Not because I was afraid of Zara, but because I wanted a record of everything that happened from now on. In divorce proceedings, documentation is everything. The locksmith arrived at 10, a cheerful man named Pete who asked no questions about why I needed every lock in the house changed immediately. By noon, I had new keys and the satisfaction of knowing Zara couldn't just walk back into what she'd started thinking of as her domain. But I wasn't done yet. My next stop was the county clerk's office, where I filed a legal notice of changed residence status. Then, I visited the post office to redirect my mail to a secure box downtown. Every step was legal, documented, and designed to make it clear that I was serious about ending our marriage. Around 3 p.m., my phone started ringing. Zara's number. "Drake, I'm at the house and my key doesn't work." "That's because I changed the locks." "You can't change the locks. I live there too." "Actually, I can. I filed the proper legal notices and followed all required procedures. You'll need to make arrangements for alternative housing." "Alternative housing? Are you insane? That's my home." "It's my house, Zara. Check the deed. My inheritance paid the down payment, my income pays the mortgage, and my name is on the title. You have legal rights as a spouse, but those are being addressed through the divorce proceedings." The line went quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, calculating instead of angry. "Fine, I'll stay with Carla tonight. But this isn't over, Drake. You have no idea what you've started." She was wrong about that. I knew exactly what I'd started, and I was prepared for whatever came next. What came next was a coordinated attack on my reputation. Saturday morning brought the first wave. My phone rang at 7 a.m., my brother calling from Phoenix. "Drake, what the hell is going on up there? Zara called Mom and Dad last night, crying about how you've lost your mind and thrown her out of the house." "Did she mention the divorce papers?" "She said you filed them in some kind of psychotic break. Said you've been acting strange for weeks, paranoid and controlling." "And you believed her?" A pause. "I don't know what to believe. This doesn't sound like you, but throwing your wife out of the house doesn't sound like you either." I spent 20 minutes explaining the real situation to my brother, including Zara's threat to replace me and her pattern of financial manipulation. By the end of the conversation, he was starting to understand. "She really said that? In front of Mom and Dad?" "Ask them yourself." But when he called our parents, he discovered that Zara had already gotten to them with her version of events. According to her story, I'd misunderstood an innocent joke and overreacted catastrophically. She was the victim of a husband who'd suddenly become unstable and vindictive. The second wave came through social media. Zara had always been active on Facebook and Instagram, posting carefully curated images of our supposedly perfect life. Now she was using those same platforms to paint herself as a confused, hurt wife whose husband had inexplicably turned against her. Her posts were masterfully crafted, just enough detail to seem authentic, but vague enough to avoid legal trouble. She talked about sudden changes in my behavior, financial manipulation, and feeling unsafe in my own home. The comments section filled up with sympathetic friends offering support and expressing shock that I could be so cruel. But Zara made one crucial mistake. She got greedy. Sunday afternoon, she posted a longer message that went into more detail about our relationship. She claimed I'd been controlling our finances for years, that I'd isolated her from her friends, and that I'd threatened her when she tried to assert her independence. She even included screenshots of text messages that supposedly showed me being emotionally abusive. The problem was, I'd never sent those messages. I screenshot everything before she could take it down, then forwarded the evidence to Margaret Collins. "She's fabricating evidence," I told my attorney. "These text messages never existed." "Can you prove that?" "Absolutely. I have complete phone records going back 2 years, and I can demonstrate that the metadata on these screenshots has been manipulated." Margaret's voice sharpened with interest. "That's defamation, possibly fraud. We can use this." But before we could take legal action, Zara made an even bigger mistake. She tried to turn my own family against me by showing them the fake text messages. Monday evening, my mother called. "Drake, I need to ask you something, And I want you to be honest with me. Did you send these messages to Zara? She read me the text messages from Zara's screenshots, ugly, threatening language that sounded nothing like how I actually spoke. Messages about controlling her money, keeping her isolated, and making her regret crossing me. Mom, I never sent any of those messages. I can prove it. How? Meet me for coffee tomorrow morning. Bring Dad. I'll show you everything. Tuesday morning at the coffee shop downtown, I spread out the real evidence for my parents to see. Phone records showing no messages sent to Zara during the times indicated on her screenshots. Bank records proving that she'd had independent access to money throughout our marriage. Documentation of her threat to replace me, witnessed by them personally. But the most damaging evidence was technical. I'd asked a friend who worked in IT forensics to analyze Zara's screenshots, and he'd found clear signs of digital manipulation. These messages were created using a text message generator app, I explained to my parents. Look at the timestamp formatting. It doesn't match the actual formatting used by our phone carrier. My father, who'd worked in construction management for 30 years, understood documentation and evidence. She faked these? Every single one. My mother looked stricken. But why would she do something like that? Because she's realizing that she can't control the divorce proceedings the way she controlled our marriage. She's desperate. That afternoon, Margaret Collins filed a motion with the court documenting Zara's defamatory social media posts and fraudulent text messages. We requested sanctions and an expedited hearing. But Zara wasn't finished. If anything, being caught in her lies made her more dangerous. Wednesday morning brought wave 3 of her counterattack, and this time she aimed directly at my business. I arrived at my workshop to find a letter from the city building inspector. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that I was operating a commercial business in violation of residential zoning laws. The letter demanded an immediate inspection and threatened to shut down my operation pending a full review. The complaint was anonymous, but I knew exactly who had filed it. I called the inspector's office and scheduled the earliest possible appointment, then spent the rest of the day gathering documentation to prove that my workshop was properly licensed and operated within all applicable regulations. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 days, I received complaints from the State Tax Authority, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Occupational Safety Administration. Someone was systematically trying to destroy my business using bureaucratic warfare. Each complaint required hours of paperwork, documentation, and explanation. Each investigation tied up my time and resources. Each agency visit created the impression that I was some kind of problem business owner, even though every complaint ultimately proved to be baseless. Zara was using the system against me, filing anonymous reports that triggered automatic investigations. She couldn't prove I was actually violating any laws, but she could make my life miserable while the authorities sorted everything out. It was brilliant, actually, and completely illegal. Thursday evening, I was in my workshop organizing paperwork for the latest round of inspections when my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Torrin, this is Detective Williams with the County Sheriff's Office. We've received a report of domestic harassment, and we'd like to speak with you. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of report? Your wife claims you've been stalking her, following her to work, and making threatening phone calls. She's requested a restraining order. Detective, I haven't contacted my wife since Monday, and I can prove it. I also haven't left my property except for business meetings, and I have witnesses for every trip. Would you be willing to come to the station to discuss this? With my attorney present, absolutely. I called Margaret Collins immediately. She's escalating. False police report this time. I'll meet you at the station. Don't say anything until I get there. The sheriff's station was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, uncomfortable chairs, and the smell of bad coffee. Detective Williams turned out to be a tired-looking woman in her 40s who seemed skeptical of everyone and everything. Mr. Torrin, your wife claims you've been harassing her since she moved out. Phone calls, following her car, showing up at her workplace. She says she's afraid for her safety. Margaret spoke before I could respond. My client has had no contact with his estranged wife since their separation. We have phone records, GPS data from his vehicle, and witness statements to support that claim. She provided recordings of threatening voicemails, Detective Williams said. May we hear them? The detective played 3 voicemails on her computer. The voice sounded like mine, but the words were wrong. Angry, threatening language about making Zara pay for leaving me and promising to make her life miserable. Detective, Margaret said, those recordings have been digitally manipulated. The voice patterns don't match my client's natural speech, and we can provide expert analysis to prove it. You're saying she faked these too? We're saying she's engaged in a pattern of fabricating evidence to support false claims. We have documentation of previous instances. Detective Williams looked from Margaret to me and back again. This is getting complicated. It doesn't have to be, I said. Give me a polygraph test, check my phone records, interview my neighbors. I'm telling the truth. What about the restraining order request? We'll oppose it in court, Margaret said. And we'll be filing our own complaint for filing false police reports. The detective closed her notebook. Mr. Torrin, I'm not going to arrest you today, but I strongly suggest you avoid any contact with your wife until this gets sorted out in court. That won't be a problem. But as we left the station, I realized Zara had accomplished exactly what she'd intended. Even though the police didn't believe her story, she'd created an official record of her allegations. In divorce court, that record would be used to paint me as unstable and potentially dangerous. She was playing chess while I'd been playing checkers. Time to change the game. Friday morning, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I hired a private investigator. His name was Tommy Brennan, a former police detective who specialized in domestic cases. Margaret Collins had recommended him, describing Tommy as thorough, discreet, and completely unimpressed by people who thought they could manipulate the system. Your wife's been busy, Tommy said, reviewing the file I'd brought him. False police reports, fabricated evidence, coordinated harassment through multiple agencies. She's either very smart or very desperate. Both, probably. The question is, what else is she hiding? In my experience, people who are willing to fake evidence usually have something real they're trying to cover up. That afternoon, Tommy began what he called background development on Zara and her activities since our separation. Within 48 hours, he'd uncovered information that changed everything. Zara hadn't just been staying with her friend Carla. She'd been living with a man named David Patterson, a divorced real estate developer who owned a penthouse condo downtown. According to Tommy's research, their relationship had been going on for at least 6 months, long before our marriage had officially ended. She's been planning this for a while, Tommy explained, showing me surveillance photos of Zara entering and leaving David's building. The timing suggests she was setting up her exit strategy before she started the public humiliation campaign. But that wasn't the most interesting part. David Patterson was in the middle of a messy business dispute with the City Planning Commission over a controversial development project. He needed positive publicity and community support, which made his relationship with a woman who was publicly claiming to be the victim of domestic harassment very convenient. You think they're coordinating their stories? I think your wife found a man who benefits from her victim narrative, and he's helping her make it convincing. Tommy had also discovered something else. The anonymous complaints against my business hadn't been filed randomly. They'd been submitted using inside knowledge of regulatory procedures and specific technical language that suggested familiarity with government processes. David Patterson had spent years navigating city bureaucracy for his development projects. He knew exactly which agencies to contact, which complaints would trigger automatic investigations, and how to phrase allegations to cause maximum disruption. They're not just trying to win the divorce, I realized. They're trying to destroy my ability to earn a living. Classic economic warfare, Tommy agreed. If they can prove you're financially unstable or professionally unreliable, it strengthens her claim for support payments. That weekend, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks earlier. I was going to fight back using their own tactics. Monday morning, I filed my own complaint with the City Planning Commission. Not an anonymous complaint, but a detailed, documented objection to David Patterson's development project. I'd done my research, and his proposed building violated several environmental regulations and height restrictions. Unlike Zara's anonymous harassment, my complaint was factual, well-documented, and filed under my real name. I wasn't hiding behind false allegations. I was using legitimate regulatory processes to create problems for someone who'd been creating problems for me. The complaint triggered an automatic review of Patterson's project, potentially delaying his construction timeline by months. In real estate development, delays cost money. Lots of money. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. "This is David Patterson. I think we need to talk." "I don't think we do." "You filed a complaint against my development project." "I filed a legitimate regulatory objection based on documented violations. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the City Planning Commission." "Look, Torrin, I don't know what your wife told you about our relationship, but this doesn't have to get ugly." "It's already ugly, Mr. Patterson. You helped her file false police reports and fraudulent regulatory complaints. That makes you an accessory to harassment." "You can't prove that." "Actually, I can. My investigator has been very thorough." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Patterson spoke again, his voice had lost its confident edge. "What do you want?" "I want you to convince Zara to drop her false allegations and settle the divorce reasonably. In exchange, I'll consider withdrawing my complaint against your project." "And if she won't?" "Then you'll both discover that I can be just as creative with legal harassment as you've been." That evening, Zara called me for the first time since our confrontation in the kitchen. "Drake, we need to talk, face to face." "I don't think that's a good idea. Your restraining order request is still pending." "I'm withdrawing the restraining order and the police complaint. I think we both got carried away." "Interesting change of heart. Can we meet somewhere neutral, just to talk about settling this reasonably?" I suggested the coffee shop downtown where I'd met my parents, public, well-lit, with plenty of witnesses. She agreed to meet me there the next evening. Wednesday at 7 p.m., I arrived at the coffee shop to find Zara already waiting at a corner table. She looked different, tired, less polished than usual, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her typical designer outfit. "You look good," she said as I sat down across from her. "You look like you've had a rough week." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. David's project got suspended pending review. His investors are furious and he's not handling stress very well." "Trouble in paradise?" "Drake, I made a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. The fake text messages, the police report, all of it. I was angry and scared, and I did things I shouldn't have done." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to settle this divorce without destroying each other. We had 15 good years together. It doesn't have to end with us hating each other." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. She seemed genuine, but Zara had always been an excellent actress. "What kind of settlement are you thinking about?" 50-50 split of assets. I keep the house, you keep your business and workshop. No support payments either way. Clean break. It was actually a reasonable offer, better than I'd expected to get in court, but something about her sudden willingness to negotiate made me suspicious. "What's the catch, Zara?" "No catch. I just want this to be over." "And David Patterson? What does he get out of this?" Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something desperate underneath. "David and we're taking a break. He thinks I bring too much drama into his life." There it was. Her new relationship had collapsed under the pressure of my counterattack, leaving her without the financial and emotional support she'd counted on. She was trying to salvage what she could from the wreckage. I'll consider your offer, I said. But I want everything in writing, and I want compensation for the business losses caused by your false complaints. How much compensation? $50,000, plus a written admission that the police report and regulatory complaints were false. Her face went white. 50,000? I don't have that kind of money. Then you shouldn't have tried to destroy my business. Drake, please. I made mistakes, but I'm trying to make them right. No, Zara. You're trying to minimize the consequences of your mistakes. There's a difference. I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Wait. What if I could give you something better than money? Like what? She glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. Information about David's business dealings. He's not as clean as he pretends to be. There are things the Planning Commission doesn't know about his financing, his environmental impact studies, his connections to city officials. You want me to blackmail him? I want you to have leverage, the same kind of leverage he's had over other people for years. I sat back down, intrigued despite myself. What kind of information? The kind that could shut down more than just one development project. The kind that could end his career. For the first time since this whole mess started, Zara was offering me something I actually wanted. The ability to completely neutralize the threat she and Patterson had created. I'll need to verify whatever you give me. Of course. But Drake, once I give you this information, we're even. No more games, no more revenge. We settle the divorce and move on with our lives. We'll see. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't ready to move on. Zara had humiliated me, lied about me, and tried to destroy my business. A simple divorce settlement wasn't enough to balance those scales. She was about to learn that some games don't end until there's a clear winner. The information Zara provided was better than I'd hoped. David Patterson hadn't just bent a few rules with his development project. He'd systematically defrauded investors, falsified environmental reports, and bribed city officials to fast-track approvals. Tommy Brennan spent 3 days verifying the documents Zara had copied from Patterson's home office. Bank records showing suspicious payments to city council members, environmental studies with altered data, investment prospectuses that promised returns based on fabricated market research. This guy's been running a sophisticated fraud operation for years, Tommy reported. Your wife just handed you enough evidence to put him in federal prison. What's the best way to use it? Depends what you want to accomplish. You could turn it over to the FBI and let them handle prosecution. Or you could use it as leverage to make your problems disappear. I chose leverage. Thursday morning, I called David Patterson and arranged a meeting at his downtown office. He agreed, probably thinking I was ready to negotiate some kind of truce now that his relationship with Zara had ended. Patterson's office occupied the top floor of one of the buildings he'd developed, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. He was waiting behind an expensive glass desk, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Mr. Torrin, I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this situation. I set a manila folder on his desk without opening it. I want you to look at these documents and tell me if you recognize them. He flipped through the folder, his confident expression gradually changing to something approaching panic. Bank statements, environmental reports, investor communications, all the evidence of his fraudulent activities, neatly organized and documented. Where did you get these? That's not important. What matters is what I'm going to do with them. These are private business documents. Obtaining them illegally makes you guilty of what? Receiving information voluntarily provided by someone who had legitimate access to it? I don't think so. Patterson closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. What do you want? I want you to fix the problems you and Zara created for me. Contact every agency that received complaints about my business and withdraw them, citing new information that proves they were filed in error. issue a public statement acknowledging that the complaints were baseless. And in exchange, I don't turn these documents over to the FBI, the IRS, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about mutually assured destruction. You tried to destroy my business using false allegations. I'm offering you the chance to undo that damage before I respond with true allegations. Patterson studied me for a long moment, probably trying to calculate his options. He could refuse my demands, but that would mean facing federal prosecution for fraud. He could agree to my terms, but that would mean admitting his complaints against me were false. How do I know you won't use this information anyway, even if I cooperate? You don't, but you know for certain what happens if you don't cooperate. He made the smart choice. By Friday afternoon, every regulatory agency that had investigated my business received formal withdrawals of the complaints against me. Patterson also issued a statement to the City Planning Commission acknowledging that his objections to my workshop had been based on incomplete information and were being retracted. But I wasn't finished with him yet. Saturday morning, I called the investigative reporter at the local newspaper who'd been covering Patterson's development projects. I didn't provide any of the fraudulent documents. That would have been illegal. Instead, I simply suggested she might want to look more closely at the financing and environmental studies for his current project. "What makes you think there's a story there?" she asked. "Just a hunch. Sometimes when someone is willing to file false complaints against a small business owner, it makes you wonder what else they might be willing to falsify." She took the hint. Within a week, she'd uncovered enough irregularities to justify a full investigation. The story ran on the front page of Sunday's paper. Local developer faces questions about project financing. The article didn't accuse Patterson of anything illegal, but it raised enough questions to spook his investors and trigger reviews by multiple regulatory agencies. His development project was officially suspended pending investigation. David Patterson's career was effectively over, and I hadn't even used the most damaging evidence Zara had provided. But dealing with Patterson had been the easy part. Zara herself was proving to be a more complex problem. She'd kept her word about withdrawing the false police reports and regulatory complaints. She'd also agreed to a reasonable divorce settlement that didn't require me to pay support or give up my business. On paper, everything was proceeding smoothly toward a final resolution. The problem was, I no longer trusted her to honor any agreement we made. Monday afternoon, Margaret Collins called with an update on the divorce proceedings. The court has scheduled a final hearing for next month. If both parties agree to the settlement terms, it should be a simple formality. Your wife's attorney seems eager to finalize everything quickly. Too eager? That's what I'm thinking. Usually when someone who's been fighting aggressively suddenly becomes cooperative, it means they're planning something. That evening, I asked Tommy Brennan to resume surveillance on Zara's activities. If she was planning some kind of final move, I wanted to know about it before it happened. Tommy's report arrived Wednesday morning, and it confirmed my suspicions. Zara had been meeting with a different attorney, not the one representing her in our divorce, but a specialist in civil litigation. She'd also been photographing and documenting everything in our house, creating what looked like an inventory of valuable items. "She's planning to sue you," Tommy concluded. "Probably for emotional distress, defamation, or some other civil claim that wouldn't be covered by the divorce settlement." "Can she do that?" "Technically, yes. The divorce settlement only covers marital assets and support obligations. If she claims you damaged her reputation or caused her emotional trauma through your actions, she could file a separate lawsuit seeking monetary damages. It was actually a clever strategy. Agree to a reasonable divorce settlement to get the marriage dissolved quickly, then file a civil suit claiming I destroyed her career and emotional well-being through my harassment and stalking. Even if she couldn't prove her claims, the lawsuit would tie up my assets and cost me thousands in legal fees. But Zara had made one crucial mistake. She was planning her strategy based on the assumption that I still cared about playing by the rules. Thursday evening, I drove to the house where Zara was staying with her friend Carla. It was a modest two-story home in an older neighborhood, nothing like the upscale lifestyle Zara had become accustomed to during our marriage. I parked across the street and waited. Around 9 p.m., Zara emerged from the house carrying a box of what looked like legal documents. She loaded the box into her car and drove toward downtown, probably heading to her attorney's office for a late-night strategy session. I followed at a distance, not to confront her, but to confirm Tommy's suspicions about her plans. She parked outside a law office building and spent nearly 2 hours inside. When she finally emerged, she was carrying different documents, probably the civil lawsuit she was planning to file. But instead of driving back to Carla's house, she made an unexpected stop. A bar called Murphy's Tavern, a dive establishment that seemed completely out of character for someone with Zara's social pretensions. I parked where I could observe the entrance and waited to see who she was meeting. 20 minutes later, a man I didn't recognize joined her at a corner table. He was older, maybe 50, wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase that had seen better days. Through the window, I watched them have an intense conversation over drinks. The man showed Zara several documents, pointing to specific sections and explaining something that made her nod eagerly. She handed him an envelope, probably containing cash payment for whatever services he was providing. When they finished their meeting, the man left first. Zara waited 10 minutes before following, but instead of going home, she drove to a 24-hour copy shop. She spent another hour inside, probably reproducing whatever documents the man had provided. I'd seen enough. Zara wasn't just planning a civil lawsuit. She was manufacturing evidence to support it. The man in the bar was probably a private investigator or document specialist who helped people create convincing but false evidence for legal proceedings. Friday morning, I called an emergency meeting with Margaret Collins and Tommy Brennan. "She's escalating again," I explained, showing them the surveillance photos Tommy had taken. "Whatever she's planning, it's going to be bigger than fake text messages or false police reports. The question is, do we wait for her to make her move, or do we strike first?" Margaret asked. "What would striking first look like?" "We could file for sanctions based on her previous false allegations. Request a court order prohibiting her from filing frivolous lawsuits, maybe even pursue criminal charges for filing false police reports." It was tempting, but I had a better idea. "What if we let her file whatever lawsuit she's planning, but we're ready with evidence that destroys her credibility completely?" "That's risky," Tommy warned. "If her manufactured evidence is convincing enough, you could face serious financial exposure. Not if we can prove it's manufactured." That weekend, I implemented the most complex part of my plan yet. If Zara wanted to play games with evidence and documentation, I was going to show her how a professional craftsman approaches that kind of work. I started by creating a comprehensive record of my own activities and communications over the past month. GPS data from my truck showing where I'd been and when. Phone records proving who I'd called and texted. Security camera footage from my workshop documenting my daily routine. But I also created something else. A trap. Using techniques Tommy had taught me, I planted false information where Zara's investigator would be likely to find it. Fake documents suggesting I'd been planning the divorce for years. Fabricated email accounts that made it look like I'd been coordinating with other people to humiliate her. False financial records indicating I'd hidden assets from the divorce settlement. The information was designed to be discovered through the kind of illegal surveillance Zara's investigator was probably conducting. If she used any of it in her lawsuit, I could prove it was fabricated and demonstrate that she'd obtained it through criminal means. It was a sophisticated entrapment operation, and it required patience to execute properly. But after everything Zara had put me through, I had plenty of motivation to be patient. Monday morning, Margaret Collins received the documents we'd been expecting. Zara had filed a civil lawsuit seeking $200,000 in damages for emotional distress, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional harm. The lawsuit claimed I'd systematically destroyed her reputation, stalked and harassed her, and caused her to lose employment opportunities through my vindictive and malicious behavior. It was supported by dozens of exhibits, photos, documents, recordings, and witness statements. "It's actually very well put together," Margaret admitted. "If someone didn't know the background, this would be convincing." "How much of it is fake?" "Based on what we know about her previous fabrications. Probably most of it." "Good. That means we can destroy her credibility completely when we respond." But as I read through Zara's lawsuit, I realized she'd made an error that was going to cost her everything. In her eagerness to make her case as strong as possible, she'd included some of the false information I'd planted for her to find. She'd taken the bait. Now it was time to spring the trap. The hearing for Zara's civil lawsuit was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late November. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. Perfect atmosphere for what I had planned. Zara arrived with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Wells, who specialized in personal injury and emotional distress cases. They'd obviously spent considerable time preparing, judging by the stack of binders and exhibits they wheeled in on a cart. I sat with Margaret Collins at the defendant's table, our own materials organized in a single briefcase. We looked underprepared compared to Zara's elaborate presentation, which was exactly the impression I wanted to create. Judge Harrison was a no-nonsense man in his 60s who'd been handling civil cases for over 20 years. He'd seen every kind of lawsuit, every type of evidence, and every variety of legal manipulation. More importantly, he had a reputation for being extremely harsh with parties who wasted his time with frivolous claims. "Ms. Wells," the judge said, "this is your motion. Present your case." Patricia Wells stood and launched into an opening statement that painted me as a vindictive, controlling husband who'd systematically destroyed Zara's life out of spite. According to her narrative, I'd stalked Zara after she left me, harassed her at work, and spread false rumors that cost her employment opportunities. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Torrin engaged in a calculated campaign of emotional terrorism against my client. He used his knowledge of her personal life and professional relationships to inflict maximum psychological damage. She was good, I had to admit. Her presentation was polished, emotional, and designed to generate sympathy for Zara's supposed suffering. Then she began presenting exhibits. The first batch was legitimate. Copies of the divorce papers, bank records showing the separation of our accounts, and documentation of the changed locks on our house. Nothing controversial, just establishing the timeline of our separation. But then, she moved to the more dramatic evidence. Exhibit 12, Your Honor, is a recording of threatening voicemails left by Mr. Torrin on my client's phone. The same fake recordings Zara had played for the police, featuring a voice that sounded like mine making threats I'd never made. Margaret and I exchanged glances. We'd already prepared expert testimony proving these recordings were digitally manipulated. Exhibit 15 consists of text messages showing Mr. Torrin's escalating pattern of harassment. More fabricated evidence, including some of the fake messages I'd planted for Zara to find. She was building her case on a foundation of lies, just as I'd hoped she would. But the most interesting exhibit was number 23. Your Honor, this email was recovered from Mr. Torrin's personal computer, showing his premeditated plan to destroy my client's reputation and financial security. Patricia Wells read from a document that supposedly showed me coordinating with other people to humiliate Zara publicly. The email was detailed, vindictive, and completely fabricated. Part of the false information I'd planted specifically to trap her. "Where did you obtain this email, Ms. Wells?" Judge Harrison asked. "It was provided by a private investigator hired by my client to document Mr. Torrin's harassment." "And how did this investigator gain access to Mr. Torrin's personal computer?" Patricia Wells hesitated. "I believe it was obtained through legitimate investigative methods." "I see. Continue with your presentation. She spent another hour presenting evidence, building what seemed like an overwhelming case against me. Financial records suggesting I'd hidden assets, photos supposedly showing me following Zara's car, witness statements claiming I'd made threatening remarks about her. By the time she finished, even I was impressed by the scope and detail of the fabricated evidence. If someone didn't know better, I would have seemed like a dangerous, obsessive stalker who'd made Zara's life a nightmare. "Mr. Collins," the judge said, "your response?" Margaret stood and walked to the center of the courtroom carrying a single folder. "Your Honor, everything you've just heard is fiction. Ms. Torrin and her attorney have presented this court with a lawsuit based almost entirely on fabricated evidence, illegally obtained documents, and perjured testimony." She opened the folder and removed a single sheet of paper. "This is a forensic analysis of the voicemail recordings presented as Exhibit 12. The analysis proves these recordings were created using voice synthesis software, not recorded from actual phone calls." Patricia Wells started to object, but Margaret continued. "This is a metadata analysis of the text messages presented as Exhibit 15. The analysis shows these messages were created using a text generator application and were never actually sent or received by any phone." Now Patricia Wells was on her feet. "Your Honor, I object to this ambush presentation of evidence." "Ms. Collins provided discovery of these analyses last week, as required," Judge Harrison replied. "Sit down, Ms. Wells." But Margaret was just getting started. "Your Honor, the most damaging evidence against Ms. Torrin's credibility is Exhibit 23, the email she claims was obtained from my client's computer." She walked to our table and retrieved a laptop computer. "This email was never sent by my client because my client never wrote it. The email was created by my client as part of a counterintelligence operation to identify the source of illegal surveillance being conducted against him." The courtroom went completely silent. "The email was stored in a secure folder on my client's computer, protected by multiple layers of encryption and access controls. The only way to obtain this email was through unauthorized computer intrusion, a federal crime." Margaret turned to face Zara and her attorney. "Ms. Torrin hired a private investigator to hack into my client's computer and steal his personal files. When she found this email, she was so eager to use it against him that she failed to realize it was bait in a trap designed to catch her in the act of illegal surveillance." Judge Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Are you saying the plaintiff committed a crime to obtain evidence for this lawsuit?" "Yes, Your Honor. Computer intrusion, theft of electronic data, and violation of privacy laws. We have documented proof of the illegal access, including server logs and security camera footage showing the investigators' activities." Patricia Wells looked like she'd been hit by a truck. She was frantically whispering with Zara, probably trying to figure out how much trouble they were in. But Margaret wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we've prepared a comprehensive analysis of every piece of evidence presented by the plaintiff. Our investigation shows that over 80% of their exhibits are either completely fabricated or illegally obtained." She handed a thick folder to the judge. "This includes forensic analysis of digital evidence, expert testimony on document authentication, and sworn statements from witnesses who can testify that the plaintiff's claims are false." Judge Harrison spent several minutes reviewing the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. "Ms. Wells, do you have a response to these allegations?" Patricia Wells stood slowly, clearly trying to buy time to think. "Your Honor, we would need time to review this new information and prepare a proper response." "I'm sure you would. But first, I want to hear from your client directly." He turned to Zara, who had gone completely pale. "Ms. Torrin, did you hire someone to hack into your husband's computer?" Zara looked at her attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "Your Honor, I hired a private investigator to gather information about my husband's activities. I didn't know the specific methods he used. Did you know that hacking into someone's computer is a federal crime? I thought it was legal if it was for a lawsuit. Judge Harrison's expression suggested he'd heard enough. Ms. Torrin, you've presented this court with a lawsuit based on fabricated evidence obtained through criminal activity. You've wasted court time and resources with frivolous claims supported by perjured testimony. He turned to Patricia Wells. Ms. Wells, as an officer of this court, you have an obligation to verify the authenticity of evidence before presenting it. The fact that you failed to do so suggests either incompetence or complicity in your client's fraudulent scheme. Your Honor, I relied on my client's representations about the evidence. That's not sufficient. You're an experienced attorney. You should have recognized the signs of fabricated evidence. Judge Harrison closed the folder and looked directly at Zara. Ms. Torrin, your lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. You are prohibited from filing any further legal actions against Mr. Torrin without prior court approval. You are also ordered to pay his attorney fees and court costs. But he wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution. Computer intrusion and perjury are serious crimes that will not be tolerated in my courtroom. Zara started to cry, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of panic and desperation as she realized the full scope of what had just happened. Ms. Wells, you are ordered to appear before the State Bar Disciplinary Committee to explain your role in presenting fraudulent evidence. This hearing is adjourned. As the judge left the courtroom, Zara turned to look at me with an expression of pure hatred. You planned this, she whispered. You set me up. No, Zara. You set yourself up. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself with. Patricia Wells was frantically packing her briefcase, probably already planning her own damage control strategy. She'd likely face disciplinary action and possibly criminal charges for her role in presenting the fabricated evidence. But Zara's problems were just beginning. Over the next week, the district attorney's office filed charges against her for computer intrusion, perjury, and filing false police reports. Her private investigator was arrested and agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story about David Patterson's suspended development project, mentioning that his former girlfriend had been charged with multiple felonies related to harassment and fraud. The story effectively ended any chance Zara had of rebuilding her reputation in our community. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when I received a call from Zara's new attorney, a public defender assigned to handle her criminal case. Mr. Torrin, my client would like to discuss a settlement of your divorce case. I thought that was already settled. She's willing to waive any claim to marital assets in exchange for your agreement not to pursue additional civil remedies against her. What additional civil remedies? She's concerned you might sue her for defamation, harassment, or intentional infliction of emotional distress. I almost laughed. After everything she'd put me through, Zara was now worried that I might do to her what she'd tried to do to me. Tell your client I'll consider her offer, I said. But my consideration will depend on one additional condition. What condition? She needs to issue a public apology acknowledging that her allegations against me were false and that I never engaged in any of the behavior she claimed. I'll discuss it with her. 2 days later, the public defender called back. My client agrees to your terms. She'll issue the public apology and waive all claims to marital assets. In writing, notarized, and published in the local newspaper. Agreed. The apology appeared in Sunday's paper, buried in the legal notices section but officially on the record. Zara admitted that her allegations against me had been false, that she had fabricated evidence to support her claims, and that I had never stalked, harassed, or threatened her in any way. It was a complete vindication, but more importantly, it was a complete victory. 6 months later, I received the final divorce decree in the mail. I owned the house, my business, and all the assets I'd accumulated during our marriage. Zara owned nothing except a criminal record and a reputation that would follow her wherever she went. She'd threatened to replace me if I didn't behave. Instead,